Hey, everybody. Welcome to this episode of the B2B Revenue Leadership Podcast. Hey, it's another year, another time to make some more money, and I've got the course for you. Start the conversation, get the meeting will help your team, both business development, sales development, get into those new cold accounts, whether that function is under marketing or sales. I'll help you with that by starting organic, natural conversations, not pitching. Have people open up with you, build up a connection with them, understand your total addressable market, prioritize it, and put in a system that scales, that's predictable, that works the way you want it to work instead of the old school pitch. Believe me, I've sat through so many of these cold calling seminars, courses, books, and I've been doing it for 30 years, and it's evolved. And what I'm doing today is what's working in today's world. It works naturally, and people are just loving it, getting meetings, closing deals, and doing it without the rejection that is typically there in sales. So check it out at b2brevenue.com under the training tab. You can schedule a call with me. We can talk it over. I'll explain how it works and how we can work together on it. You can buy it per student, or I'll customize it for your particular product and team and coach you through that process. Also, if you're a sales leader and you want predictability, you want direction, momentum, and control with your deals, you can sign up for that course as well. Same type of model. A year-long access to it. It's content, community, and coaching, all included at b2brevenue.com. You can get my free ebook there on how companies make product selections. That's all free. Let's get into the interview, but I want to make sure you're checking out my partners. They're in the show notes. This week, it's Pipedrive and CoVideo. Pipedrive is the new CRM. It's been out for 5 years. I've been using it forever. I love that. It's connected up with your email, your calendar, and now they have team capabilities. CoVideo is the video email system. It's beautiful. It's wonderful. It's the way to break into new accounts. It's so much more engaging than text. Check them out. Also, make sure you're checking me out on LinkedIn, Brian G. Burns on LinkedIn. Let's get into the interview. I'll sum it up at the end. Hey, David, thanks for joining us today. As a way of getting started, tell us about yourself.
Well, my name is David. We've established that, right? So
we're halfway there.
We're halfway, yeah. The other half is Baker. So I do three things for a living. I consult with small entrepreneurial professional service firms. I speak and I write. And I live in Nashville, Tennessee. I was born in the U.S., but didn't come back to live here till I was 18. Lived with a little tribe of Mayan Indians in the highlands of Guatemala for all those years, came back in the midst of a lot of culture shock, went through all kinds of grad schooling, decided that wasn't for me, and then launched this enterprise. So that's kind of in a nutshell what I do. I'm really grateful for the life I have. I get to meet all kinds of really interesting people all the time.
Well, what is it about Nashville? There seems to be a high concentration of authors and kind of experts, kind of authorities. And
yeah, it's because of the creative outlook of the town. And I think that's driven from music, even though it's much broader than music. And the odd reason why Nashville kind of came on the map is because we're a session town. So this is where people record music sessions for recordings for albums, and we do more of that than New York and LA combined, and largely it's because we're a non-union town, and so it drags people here. And because of that, it's a fun place to live. I mean, you can be at Waffle House ordering and your waiter is almost always a musician in waiting, right? So there's all kinds of fun conversations that can be had everywhere.
And it's kind of a nice party town too, isn't it?
It is. Yeah, we're getting that reputation as well. I'm maybe a little too old for that, but you probably would be right in the middle of it. Me, not so much.
Yeah. I'm probably on the latter end of it, to tell you the truth.
Yeah.
And how did you get interested in your business?
Well, I was on the couch one day and I was reading through the local newspaper and I was just struck with this odd thought. I was looking at the ads thinking, these things suck. This could we not do better than this? Surely this is not that difficult. decided to, and I was a little bit disenchanted with the job I was in at the moment. I was managing a publishing firm. So I decided to start an agency, a marketing firm, and did that for 6 years. Towards the end of that, I began to advise my peers through a strange set of circumstances. There was a publication that asked me to start writing articles and so on. And very quickly that took over my life entirely. And I transitioned to not running a firm, but to help other principals who were running firms like that. Not because I was running an amazing firm and had all this great wisdom to share, but because I was inside a different firm every week and I was learning, drinking from a fire hose, learning best practices that I could share with other folks. And so that launched the consulting career, which will be 25 years old next month.
And how do people typically find out about you? Do you do a lot of outreach, or is it mostly inbound?
It's almost all inbound. And I was in the early days of the consulting, I really had to borrow credibility. At that point, you and I have chatted about Nashville, but back then Nashville was this hick town in the South, and nobody from New York City would dare hire a consultant who lived in Nashville. So I got a toll-free number, so nobody knew where I was when they were speaking with me. And I had a full-page ad in the main trade rag of the day. It was called Communication Arts. And it was very expensive. It was $5,000 an episode, or an issue, excuse me. And it was okay. It was doing what it needed to, but I thought there's got to be a cheaper way. I decided to begin writing insight pieces and just seeing if I could collect people's email addresses. It was really content marketing, but it was before that genre was really a thing. And since then, that's all I've done largely is twice every week, I write an insight piece. There's 37,000 people that get that. I don't sell my services at all. I simply try to be helpful to them, give them some clear point of view, and trust that enough of them will call me and ask for help when they need it. So it's been a fantastic ride because I hate traditional selling, and this helps me avoid that entirely. All I have to do is be an expert that's helpful to people. I give away tons of insight, and then I charge a lot of money for it when I start to apply it to them. So that's the very simple formula.
And that's been a newsletter or a blog or both?
It's been a newsletter, right? It gets published on the website so that Google will drag organic traffic to it, but then it goes out as an email to everybody who subscribes to it. And that's where the 37,000 people, the list just keeps growing. So it's good.
That's a good size.
Yeah.
And they reach out when they're in pain. And what's the typical symptom that they call you with?
Well, they have all these issues that they need help with, but I don't help with most of those things. So I don't help at all with the craft, how to do their work. All I do is I help them make better business decisions around running the firm. So things like, how should we be positioned? How do we become less interchangeable in the marketplace? And along with that would, of course, be the lead generation plan to help them land enough new business. That's one. Second is, how should my role change as the firm grows? As we add bodies here, how do I manage this firm effectively with the right balance of doing versus thinking versus managing versus owning and so on? That's the second. The third would be really around financial metrics. So what performance should we be aiming for as a firm? And if there are any gaps in performance, how should we close those gaps? So I try to keep it very simple around those three things. And then, of course, later in the relationship, they may need help with merger, acquisition, succession work. But it starts by helping them run their businesses more. It's a boring thing to think about unless you really need that help. And then you're really listening carefully.
And is the typical problem that they're too close to the problem, that they're inside the bottle and they can't see the label on the bottle?
Yeah, exactly right. Yep. And in fact, I wrote a piece today that there were these researchers in Finland just a couple of years ago who noticed a similarity in how owners of entrepreneurial firms how the brain waves were the same when they saw pictures of their firms and when they saw pictures of their children. So they thought of their businesses as their babies, literally.
Yeah.
So when that happens, they're not all that objective about their strengths and weaknesses and areas for improvement. You can't tell a parent that their kid is kind of a brat, even though everybody knows that's the case. You don't think very objectively about things that are that close to you. So I, as an outsider, and that's what an expert does. An expert looks at something from a bigger perspective and then speaks clearly and objectively into that truth. That is really what an expert does in every setting, and that's what I try to do.
And how do you do it without them being offended about their kid being a brat or less than charming?
Yeah. Well, it helps that they are asking for help. So I'm not going in and giving them unsolicited advice. I'm not going in and giving them unsolicited advice. I'm actually responding to a request that they've made. So that helps a lot. And the other is just this sense that over many, many years, they can't help but believe that I'm in their corner. I'm trying to help them. There's nothing to be gained by hurting their feelings. It's about also listening really carefully, which is the best signal that you can send that you really do care about somebody, is to listen very carefully. And then when you speak as if you are, because you are very, very engaged in solving it. And I've had some very, very tense situations and some consulting engagements that have gone bad for sure. But generally, the way I work with people, we can talk about anything and have a kind, respectful conversation, and it works well. And it's actually, it's kind of a curse because I do this for a living. And because of that, I don't enjoy small talk all that much because it feels to me like we're avoiding having a deeper discussion, which is not a good thing because normal people need to have small talk, right? And I'm so used to doing consulting that I view that as like a waste of time until we get to the real issue. So I'm a weird individual. I'll admit that.
Well, I'm sure after a while they appreciate it, given that you probably charge by the hour.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
I always found my accountant loves small talk.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, nothing like a little bit of hourly rates to slim that talk down.
And are they typically in too much pain by the time they reach you, where they're really coming to the emergency room versus the therapist?
Sometimes they are, yes. And when that's the case, then you don't have any choice but to cut really deep and perform some emergency procedure and hope to save the leg. But I found that in general, entrepreneurs nowadays are better at seeing the signals of what's wrong. The world's been Googleized, and if somebody's open to learning, they can find those answers so much quicker than before and find them in smaller doses. So I don't find as many firms who are completely off the rails, as that used to be more the case in, the past 15, 20 years. Nowadays, people are usually listening to good things and they're making smaller course corrections along the way. That's good.
And are they just holding on to the reins too long when they don't have the skill set?
Well, the answer to that depends on where they are in the world. I find that our culture and our opportunity in the U.S., which is where you and I are right now, it allows, there's so much opportunity just falling off the trucks that you can be incompetent and not discover that for quite some time. That's not the case in other parts of the world where incompetence is going to surface immediately. In the US, you can get by with incompetence for quite a while before you even discover it, because there's so much opportunity. You can make so many mistakes and it won't necessarily kill you. I don't think that's a good thing, but it does make for some really sloppy businesses. Even the ones who start businesses, I'm not sure all of them should, right? They feel like, oh my God, I love I love riding bikes and I hate my job. Why don't I start a business that sells bikes? And so I talk about it with my friends and peers, and they all pat me on the back and say, "Oh man, follow your dream. Riches will come if you just follow your heart," which is just bullshit. It just doesn't happen. Sometimes it does, but there isn't any connection there. The fact that you love riding bicycles has no connection with running a firm, running a business that sells bicycles. And so in the US, we have these strange notions of entrepreneurship. And what I'm trying to do is to help people treat entrepreneurship as a really important discipline that needs to be done in a specific way.
That's it, because most are accidental.
Yes, exactly. All of us, right? I mean, I don't know your story, but I'll bet it was a bit accidental, just like mine was. We started it and then we discovered, oh, this is pretty, I figured it out slowly over time, but the start was often accidental.
Yeah, we become good at something, probably good enough to be a 1099, which is
right.
Not working for somebody, a contractor of some kind.
Right.
And it might be a side hustle at the beginning, and then we make the leap. We have enough savings, then we hire a buddy or a relative, even worse.
Yeah.
And it tends to grow until like either a recession hits or it gets outside of our ability or discipline.
Yeah, and it's easy to borrow money along the way as well. So
certainly in this economy,
yeah, and so the signals that the business is in trouble can be ignored by simply borrowing money or using credit cards. So that's all to say that was sort of my point, that it's pretty easy to start a business. It's a little harder to run a business successfully nowadays.
Now, what would you say your superpower is? I got a sense when you said that you like to get right to the point, that you can separate like emotion from logic. Am I reading too much into you, or?
No, I think that's accurate. I would, I'm not a very good judge of my superpower, but what other people tell me is that I can get right to the heart of the issue quickly and clearly and help people sort through that so that the fog lifts and we come up with solutions pretty quickly. I do think that's my superpower. I the flip side of that is that I'm generally impatient, and I've started to understand that about myself and how that can hinder my relationships and my work life. So the superpower is always, if it's overused, is always your biggest weakness as well. And so that's I guess two sides of the same coin.
And how about as far as in the business itself, out of like those three things that you characterized, which one of those do you think is really your top thing?
Well, there are not many people doing the business metrics, and in fact most of the ones that this industry follows, there are 55,000 firms. I'm the one that developed those, and I actually license that IP, so that's where I'm most unique, but it's not where I most enjoy the work. Where I most enjoy it is really the positioning, helping people sort through exactly what they can and should own in the marketplace,
as opposed to outsource or
just be a generalist firm that makes promises about doing everything. They're trying to be everything to everybody, and because of that, they're so easily replaceable, or they're trying to compete based on price or speed or something like that rather than expertise.
And what's the sweet spot as far as companies' client size, where it's not too big and not too small?
Well, I do work with some sole practitioners who don't have any employees, which is what I am, all the way up to 60, 70 people. That's sort of the sweet spot. And they all need to be working in the professional services space. Of course, most of my clients are in the marketing space, but I also work with consulting firms and engineers and architects, but generally in the marketing space, 60 people or lower.
And that space is a pretty dynamic space.
It is, yep. Dynamic is an interesting word. Yeah, we could pull that word apart, right?
Yeah, where they, a lot of them, and it's natural, right? Because they're mostly artisans.
Yes, right. And they got no training in running the business.
Yeah.
They got training in the art, and they're artisans, they're craftspeople, like you said, and they're almost failed at the primary thing where they went to school because they discovered, oh, I can't really make money just by doing this, and a lot of people are going to buy it. I need to turn this into a craft, and so now I need to run a business, and that takes a very different skill. But they're very interesting people in that they, the primary thing is that they are so easily distracted. They, what makes them so good at solving problems is that they look at a very disparate world and they pull all that information in and they find the patterns and then they turn it into something pretty amazing that other people don't see. But that's not necessarily the core of what it means to be disciplined. And so, yeah, it's fun. It's a challenge to work with them.
And how often do you see them having a counterpart that's the ops person, the Tim Cook of the operation?
Yeah, right. That's more common than it ever has been, partly because of a book called Traction. I don't know if you've heard of it.
I've heard of it, yeah.
Yeah, Gino Wickman wrote it, and I don't know Gino Wickman, but I've noticed that traction system is popping up more in firms. So that's built around this notion that there's a visionary, and then there is let's see, what's the other person called? The integrator. So there's a visionary and an integrator. So the visionary is the one that's dreaming about the future, thinking about where we need to be, big picture stuff. And the integrator is the person who actually makes it real, who parks unreal ideas, who helps put it into a multi-step plan and then holds us accountable. And then firms whether they use that system or not, firms that have both of those forces there tend to be the ones that accomplish the most in the marketplace.
And you recently wrote a book. What was the motivation behind that?
Well, it's sort of like drug addiction, I imagine. If you don't
chasing the dragon. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I get twitchy when I don't write, and it had been 3 or 4 years since I'd written my 4th book, and the 5th one was stewing in my head, and I just had to do it. That's how I think a lot of folks who are writers feel. It just has to happen. So I just dove in and wrote it. It's a very different book than what I envisioned, and it was a lot more passionate, the process was, than I envisioned as well. But I wanted to write some things about expertise. I wanted to tell people something. I was sick of folks making nonsense up in the expertise world, and I wanted them to think more carefully about what it is they do and how they do it. And so it's not a long book. It's only 45,000 words or so, but it was a very passionate manifesto for me.
And do you see a lot of people getting to the expertise business without much expertise?
Yes. I hesitated to answer that, but the truth is, yes, there are. It's just discouraging to me to see who folks are listening to. They're listening to folks that are really good at promoting themselves, but they haven't ever really been careful thinkers. And when I look at the disparity between the people who have been discovered and the people who should be discovered, it's a little discouraging to me, because I know all kinds of people that are so good at thinking, but they don't do the self-promotion part very well, and so they don't have an audience. And those are the people kind of quietly plying their trade in the dark who I admire so much, because they're just doing the hard work day in and day out, and they're changing their clients' lives. But they're not the famous ones. They're not the ones that write New York Times best-selling books that really should have been articles, because they're so thin in terms of thinking.
That's it. Because there's a lot, what I call there's the platform and then there's the performance. And it's the person who has the platform that gets all the accolades. Like when they make famous the 80-20 rule that's been around for 400 years, right?
Right. Exactly right.
And you're like, oh, okay. They repackage other stuff. And I guess there's a role for that.
Yeah, but you read some of it and you say, "Oh, listen, that's not a very original thought." I mean, I've seen variations of that thing 50 times, but now everybody's oohing and awing about it, and so then you're a little resentful, and then you wake up and say, "Well, more power to them. I should have packaged that thought that way, right? So it's not about resentment. It's just about, you just wish there was a stronger connection between people who are really thinking carefully and the people who are following them. I want to correct some of that imbalance in the world.
And that's it. And like with your expertise and with your clients, how much of it is judgment versus kind of experience?
Well, it's sort of like being slightly out in front of your skis all the time, but just a little bit. So you have to be advising your clients in whatever space you're in based on things you know, because you've seen them, you've seen those truths many, many times, but you're also constantly learning. So you don't go into a situation knowing all the answers. You don't go into a situation knowing nothing. There's some mix there. The way I would like to think of it is this. So an expert goes into a situation, they're not likely to see hardly anything new that they've never seen before. Every once in a while, they'll see something new. But what they will see is a very unique combination of all the different kinds of dysfunction that they've seen in many other places. And that presents a unique challenge, how to solve the combination of 14, 7, 48, and 111. Those particular forms of dysfunction. How do I solve those things? It keeps you interesting and it keeps you interested as well. But you have to always be learning in every situation. If I'm with a new client for like a 2-day sprint, I'll typically write down 3 or 4 new realizations over those 2 days, and I'll try to turn those into insight pieces where I just see something a little differently than I have before. Like, wow, that is interesting. Like, it's not that revolutionary, but it's something that is a new way of thinking. It just keeps my mind alive and active and just, I don't know, growing, I guess.
And I think what I've called it is my bullshit factor. I always felt I had, after years of experience, being able to go into an account and determine what was real versus what was smoke.
Right. Yeah. Well, how did you do that? How was it? Just a sense that you developed and learned to trust?
I think it was a sense, but I could tell when I was talking to people, were they selling me, or what was causing this? Things just didn't jive.
Right. And if you ignored your sense, it would almost always bite you, right? It made you nervous because it's just a sense you have. You can't really prove it, but if you follow your sense regularly, most of the time you're going to be right, and you owe it to yourself to do that.
And that's it, because I'd have like my manager with me, and we'd be out in the parking lot after the call. He'd be all excited, and I'd be like, I don't think they're going to do anything.
Yeah, right. Yeah, especially in a sales situation, right?
Right, because, I'm not getting paid to do it unless they buy something.
Right. Yeah. So, that's interesting.
Unlike, an hourly rate, you're at risk until they actually do something, and they kind of want to play you to help them out to see if it may be the right thing, or they're just bored or lonely.
And that's part of what I think an expert has to do, is to help the prospect get inside their head. That's one of the primary reasons why you need to be writing all the time, because if somebody's going to pay you a lot of money for something, they have a right. They really do have a right to understand how you think, how you process things. But you shouldn't have to demonstrate that individually to every prospect. You should be able to point them to some place on your website or in your blog or whatever that reveals the answers to those questions. And then that should give them confidence to then pay you a fair bit of money to do whatever it is that you do. That's another reason for the whole content marketing thing.
And tell us more about the book. What would people get out of it if they invested in reading it? And where do they get it?
So it's on Amazon, of course. It's called The Business of Expertise, or you can learn more about it at expertise.is. It's fairly expensive, but it's really not about the money. It's really about the time. I want people to, if they've spent 4 or 5 hours reading it, I want them to feel like that was a really good investment of their time. What they're going to get is a framework for positioning their own expertise so that they are not as interchangeable in the marketplace. If they do that right, they'll be able to command more money which should yield all kinds of other things. And then it talks about the positioning mistakes that you make before and after, how to present yourself as an expert, how to notice more patterns, how all that ties together. So it's a little handbook. And if you are the kind of person that highlights or underlines things, you'll have your highlighter out 200 times and you'll want to keep reading it. It's very dense in the sense that I've tried not to waste any words. I've tried to bury a lot of nuggets in there. So I hope it's helpful to folks. If there's anybody listening that doesn't have the money to buy the book and they need it, just send me a note and I'll be happy to give it to them for free. It's really not about the money for me.
And how do they contact you?
Me at davidcbaker.com.